most of the clientele that we're working with aren't, um, they don't live in that environment. They live in their work environment that they work in, or whatever the situation is for that client. But um, most of them do not understand. They look at a drawing and they'll be polite and they'll tell you that they feel like they understand what you're telling them when you're describing a drawing to them. When you put it into context, into a 3D visual, um, they not they no longer ask those kind of questions because they completely understand, like, that's the front entry of a building. That's where you would enter the building. This is where, this is how this would interact with the outside space, or whatever those situations are. We've done it internally as well, where we've done some of the VR information where we've actually walked them through so they could physically walk through the building, and see it in person, in full scale, true environmental. Like, they can walk up next to an operating room table and experience, like, okay, this is exactly what would be here. This is all the equipment that would be around me. And is everything where I want it to be? So we're using it for that purpose to help them inform us of if there's something that's out of place, if there's something that could be, done differently before we build it, so that we could fix that problem before it ever is a real problem. The benefit of the VR stuff, now that it's in the cloud, is that it's shareable across many different people. Multiple people can access it, multiple people can experience it. So not only, are we doing that with a client, but the client can then take that information and share it with somebody else that can look at it, go through it, do what they need to do with it. Where in the past, we've always had to do that, either in person, be there, showing them, walking them through it, putting the goggles on them with them, doing those kind of things. Nowadays, we can just ship the goggles out and say, here's how you access it, and walk them through it, and really get them. And even with the cloud, the web version of that has also been a huge value, because again, that's just a shareable link that you can send out to everyone. Everybody can experience it. Feedback we've gotten from that is the web link is great for when you don't have VR goggles, but the VR experience is way better than the web interface. Just because it's live, it's like real scale. It's everything feels like you're in the environment, versus when you're looking at it on the web, everything is just a web interface. But it's still better than the previous method, looking at a drawing, looking at even just a rendering or something, because you can move around inside it and, look at different things, look at the things that you want to look at, versus like when we give them a rendering, it's like, this is a rendering. And they're like, well, what does it look like if I turn around backwards? And we're not giving that to them when it's just a rendering. But when it's a 360 view that they can experience in a different way, that's where the value is, I think, really, for clients to be able to understand that. Virtual mock-up for a client, we shared all that information with them in VR. And literally the first nurse that put on the VR goggles walked right up to the bed, and the bed happened to be against the wall in this specific mock-up, and walked up, looked behind the head of the bed and said, where's the power and all the feeds that we're going to have to connect for this patient? And she looked behind the head of the bed, and they were behind the head of the bed. And she's like, well, how are we supposed to get access to that information, or those receptacles, or whatever they were that they were looking for? And so just first time, never even experiencing this before, was able to do that without fail, and inform not only us, the contractor, but the design team, to say, you need to go back and redesign this so that all of those outlets are available, either beside the bed, above the bed, something, because they're not going to be able to pull the bed out with a patient in it. to be able to access whatever they need to access behind the bed. So that was a really eye-opening experience, not only for them, but for us as well, to be able to, because in the past, we would have done that as a real mock-up, had a real bed there. And, unfortunately, we would already had the real outlets and everything else behind the head of the bed. And then once that got defined, then we would have said, oh, now we need to move all those outlets away from the head of the bed and physically change that everywhere. And that's not only a value, but it's legitimate cost that, of rework that we would have to do that we're avoiding doing by showing them it virtually. Even though the people that are actually out building the work, doing the actual building of the project, they didn't know that they could have that information visible in front of them. And so that's all we're doing is we're helping them to understand that you can have it in front of you. You can see it directly in your path. You don't have to go back to a job trailer to see that information in a drawing somewhere. Like you can pull out your phone or a device and have it right there in front of you. And that's the difference. They just didn't know that they could do it. Yeah. And the answer is yes. We've tried out lots of different VR applications, and the real driver behind us going with Sentio was the fact that it lived in the cloud, and that we could share that information rapidly with whoever, and not only share it, but once it's shared, like if there's redevelopment or if there's anything else we need to do with that project, we can just update the information and it's immediately updated to the people that we shared it with. That was the driving case behind that. The driving force behind going to Sentio was really the fact that it's cloud-based, gives everybody access to that information that we want to share it with. And that's the real differentiator for us is simply that, is the shareability and accessibility, I guess I would say, to all of that information that we want to share with them. And again, comparing Sentio to others, we've used other tour sites to give them, and that's cloud-based, tour information. However, it's in Sentio, the benefit was simply the ease of use, how we get there, how we get the information where it needs to be, and all of the different pieces that we can, dial up inside Sentio to be able to share that data.